So methods, and you'll actually hear me screw up a lot and say methods instead of functions, and they're very, very similar. They have very similar purposes. And unfortunately, I spend my first hour and a half of every day teaching Java. Java doesn't have functions. Java only has methods. And the reason that Java only has methods, and the reason that Python has methods, is that Python is an object-oriented language. And I already talked about how everything in Java is a reference. Every variable is a reference to an object. Everything in Python is an object. Everything. All the data that's stored is in objects. String is an object. A list is an object. You don't really need to know all the details about this. I mean, we kind of cover it a little bit more in Java, so CC 8B or 11, but really we don't really cover the details of that until like 30. When you start really starting to see the internals. And it's not that important to understand yet. But the thing you should know when you have an object is that objects have methods. And a method is an operation on an object. And we've done a few of these. We just didn't call them appropriate things. And we kind of glossed over it really, really fast. So a method call is much like a function call, except you have some object, a string, a list, some object. And then you have this period. And then you have some method name. And then you have some parenthesis and some list of arguments, which are the things that you pass in. Looks just like a function, right? If all you saw was that, on the right-hand side, you have a function. But a method is an operation that works on an object. So when you're basically saying, well, I want to use this object and do something, for example, let's say a string, we use this dot right here. And this dot says, use this method name on this object. And again, the method name, that's like a function name, right? It looks just like a function. And the arguments in parentheses is the same thing as a function. So it's like a function. The only difference is that a method is actually called on an object. And that's what differentiates it from a function. So let's actually look at some methods. In fact, there's some really interesting, very, very helpful methods. Let's do grades. Let's do grading breakdown for courses. Let's say I have a list of grades separated by a semicolon, right? So if I hit enter, now I have this string, which is a list of grades separated by a semicolon. Now grades is a string, which is an object in Python, and it has methods, meaning there are things that we can do to it. And the particular one that I like, the one that I use this a ton and I do programming for, UCSD stuff for grades, I actually use this a lot. There's a split method. This is a method for the string object. Remember, we invoke a method by using the dot operator on the object name. The object name is just the reference. So the reference, grades, dot, and then the method, which is called split. And this split's going to return a value. And so let's actually assign it to a variable. And what the split method is going to do is it's going to do something called the delimiter. In fact, let me print this out and then let me break it down because this is some interesting stuff to understand. This is called a delimiter. It's a string. It's a pattern. Delimiter. And so it's saying wherever you find the delimiter, split my string. And what did it create? It created a list. X is a list. And so it took this component here, and it added it to a list. Then it took this component here, and it added it to a list. It took this component here, and it added it to the list. And then finally took this last component and added it to a list. Notice that each one of those things that added to the list had multiple characters. A plus, B plus, B minus, C plus. Notice what's not in there. Where the semicolons go. The delimiter gets dropped. So, anybody here ever use Excel or Google Sheets? There's a type of file format called a CSV, comma separated values. I could open up Excel right now. I could save a file, an Excel file as a CSV. I could open it up and you would see a whole bunch of data. Let's say let's just say I had all your grades, and I know you're all perfect students, so you all have 100s, right? If you ask a question, you get 1,000. No, you all have 100. What's the delimiter? Comma. So a CSV file uses a comma for a delimiter. I use these all the time because Gradescope gives me CSV files. Canvas gives me CSV files. Stepic gives me CSV files. Google Forms gives me CSV files. So when I write, there's 30-something students in this class, which is actually small. Normal quarter, I have anywhere from 400 to 600 students. I can't hand copy everybody's stuff. I run computer programs against your grades to merge things together to upload from Gradescope to Canvas to massage data directly. So this is a very big deal, being able to split something like this. And so that is both a method call, right? This is an object. There's our period saying I'm call the split method on this reference grades, which is a string object, and split the string into multiple strings based on this delimiter, and then stick that all on the list. If there's no delimiters, it's just going to return the string as is, as an element of a list. So that's just one thing you can do. So that's a really handy, that's probably one of the most useful things I used in many different languages. Java has it. I use C# a lot, that has it. It's just a really nice thing on strings. Let's look at another example. So we looked at splitting a list, or splitting a string into a list based off a delimiter. There's another one that's called join. And remember how I said everything is an object? That's actually valid. What is quote, comma? That is a string. What is a string? A string is an object. Objects have methods. This has a join method. Join is the inverse of split. Join is going to take a list, so I'm passing it X. And it's going to take a delimiter, the comma, and rebuild the string. This is literally the opposite of what we did here. So we took one type of delimiter, we got rid of it, and then we took another thing, and what this did is it took this list and then it concatenated it with a delimiter. Then it concatenated it. So it took the first thing. Let me do this better. It took A, concatenated it with comma, concatenated it with the second item, concatenated with comma, concatenated with the third item, concatenated with comma, then the fourth item, and then it returned the list, or sorry, the string. So it rebuilt our string, but now we have a different delimiter. Very, very handy thing to do. So now you can split a list or split a string into a list and then put that list and make it into a string that has some comma separated value. I could take this, save it to a file, and then I can upload it into or open it with Excel or Google Sheets because those use comma delimited formats as CSV files. And in both of these, split and join, are returning something new. They're methods that return something new. And none of the things that we passed in, whether it was in the first one, we passed in this string, none of the things that were passed in were changed. Neither were the arguments. So we didn't change the delimiter, we didn't change grades. All we did is return a brand new list. Same thing with join. We didn't change the comma, we didn't change X. I can go back into this file and I print out X, and X is still the same, but Y is now a string. Didn't change them. We got the results from the method by returning a value. And that's handy. And sometimes there are methods, though, that we use that will modify the object itself, and which we call the method on. So for example, here's X. I want to modify X. I want to be able to add something to the end of the list. We briefly talked about concatenation using the plus operator, but there's actually a method called append on a list. And what this do, it doesn't return anything. What it does is it's going to add to the end of the list. So there, I've added a plus to the end of the list. I can append, let's append C+. And now it appended C+ to the end of the list. We can keep doing it. So append is also a method on a string. We are calling it by using the object reference, the X, the dot, then we give it the method name append, and then we pass in the argument, which is the thing we're trying to append to the list. And so when we had split and join, the result was returned when we called the method, and we had to save it into a variable using an assignment statement. But with append, we're just modifying the object as it is, and we're not actually returning anything. So every time we called append, we just changed the object. And so that's how we use methods. So it's like a function, but it's on top of an object instead.